this video, I thought it would be interesting to just go through the 7 keys, the 7 revelations that I received as I was studying end-time prophecy at the Lord's command. And I came upon these, what I call critical revelations that enable us to put the prophetic puzzle of end-time prophecy together. So I thought it would be interesting just to go through them and show what each one is in its essence and how they interrelate with each other to putting this prophetic puzzle together and contributing to a scenario of events in which we can understand exactly and put all of the prophecies together to come up with this scenario, which is what I believe the initial apostles, such as Paul and John and Peter, understood. So first of all, I have the mystery of God's great week. A great week of prophetic 1,000-year days. Now this is and was the first great key revelation that I had. What it does is it puts together a timetable. And in this timetable for the plan of redemption, we have key terms that are based on words that we would associate with a day. So, for instance, a last day, or last days, or the 3rd day, or the 7th day, the end of the days, and so forth. These day terms are all describing various aspects of this revelation of a week of 7,000-year days. Now, it's important because the baseline here is that because we know that Jesus will raise us up, resurrect us to reign with him for 1,000 years, then that must be this last day of the great week. For that to happen, for us to be able to rule and reign with him in a resurrected, glorified form in this, what could be called in the book of Acts, the appointed day, the length of the day determined by how long he rules or judges the earth. Well, we know he's going to reign for 1,000 years, so his judgeship lasts in this appointed day. It must last for 1,000 years. That's a 1,000-year day. So for all of this to take place, he must come at the end of the 6 great days from Adam. He must come at the start of the 7th day to resurrect us and seat us as the heavenly government to rule and reign with him. So that's key number 1. Key number 2, and there's no set particular order of this, except that each one adds to the other. So I just put as key number 2 the revelation of Daniel's 70th week and the midweek pause for the mystery of Christ and his church. And the idea here is we have the baseline that is coming at the end of the 6th great day. Yet we have all of these other views that have mixed up everything, that have really stirred the pot, so to speak. We have a 7-year tribulation, supposedly, because of this prophecy in Daniel chapter 9, in which we believed, we were taught, it was passed on to our generation, that the 70th week was all about the Antichrist, that the pause in the 70 weeks, 7 weeks for rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, another 62 weeks for waiting for the Messiah to come, together 69 weeks. And then it is commonly taught that the pause happens right there, that by the end of the 69th week, Jesus has already come the first time. He has already died on the cross. He has already fulfilled his 3.5 year ministry, consummating, of course, in his death on the cross, and that he was raised from the dead. All this supposedly happens by the end of the 69th week. So then what is the 70th week for? Well, they misinterpreted the entire prophecy as it pertains to this last 7 years to be about the Antichrist. When actually, if you study the prophecy very carefully and pay attention to all of the Hebrew words that are used, whether it's talking about his cutting of the covenant, whether it's talking about him as Messiah, the Prince. There's only one prince in the prophecy, that he would be cut off in the middle of the week, but not for himself, of course, for the sins of the world. That after the 69 weeks, Messiah would be cut off. Well, we read that to mean by the end of the 69 weeks, he would be cut off. But this just says after the 69 weeks. Well, we're not sure about how far after until we keep reading in the prophecy. And that's where we are told point blank that he's cut off in the middle of the week. So that's after. But the key is in the word that has to do with the cessation. He will cause sacrifice and offering to cease. And we interpret that to mean that the Antichrist would put a stop to the sacrificial offerings, which he will, but that's not what this prophecy is talking about. We know that because the word here, that he would cause sacrifice and offering to cease, is the word from which we get Sabbath. It's Shabbat. It's the same word in the Hebrew in which it says in Genesis chapter 2 that God rested or ceased from all of his works because everything was very good. He ceased from his works, Shabbat. He restfully ceased. He ceased because everything was finished. Everything was done. Nothing else needed to be done. This same word is used here in Daniel chapter 9, in Daniel's 70th week, that this is what happens to the sacrificial offerings, that they come to a restful Sabbath end. Well, who could do that? Some Antichrist? Some man of sin? No, he's talking about Messiah the Prince, that he would cause the sacrificial system to restfully cease, that on the cross he would say, it's done, it's finished. You don't need sacrifices and offerings and the blood of bulls and goats and lambs anymore, because my blood has been shed. When was it shed? When was he cut off? In the middle of the week. So you see, we have really, really misinterpreted this prophecy. And I'm just hitting the high points. You could go into it at great depth, and everything that you read in it, once you change and accept the fact that we were mistaught, that what was passed on to us was not the true interpretation of this 70th week. And once you see that, then everything becomes very, very clear as to how it's pointing to Messiah the Prince. What threw us was it says that the Prince of the people, let me say it like this, what it says that through everybody was that the people of the Prince who was to come, see, depending on whether you're thinking the Antichrist is that prince or Messiah is the prince to come. Well, the people of this prince are the ones who destroyed Jerusalem and the city and the temple. So we thought, well, that made sense that it would be the Antichrist to do that. But how do you understand the people of an Antichrist in the future who would destroy the temple, because the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. So the answer is solved when you realize that the people of the prince, Messiah the Prince, to come, the Jewish people, or you could even get more specific, the generation of Jewish people at the coming of Messiah the Prince when he came the first time, they were the ones responsible ultimately for not only his crucifixion, but also the destruction of their temple and being driven from the land. They're the ones who made it and transformed it or degenerated it from a house of prayer into a den of thieves. And that was the testimony of the Jewish general Josephus, who, having been captured, was forced to watch the siege and, as a historian, documented what happened. And in his own words, he said, our own people were the ones responsible for destroying the temple. Yeah, the Romans surrounded it and they played a part, but it would never have happened had it not been for the Jewish revolt and what they did inside. In Josephus' own words, was even worse than what the Romans did to them, what they did to each other. So ultimately, it was the generation of Jesus' time. He said, I have come in my Father's name, and you don't receive me. If another comes in his own name, him you will receive. But he came to his own, and his own received him not. And so many of the judgments that Jesus pronounced were upon his generation, the people of his generation, the people of the prince. So once you take another look at this amazing prophecy, you realize that it does not teach about a future Antichrist. Not to say that there isn't one coming, of course there is, but other prophecies talk about that. But in this prophecy, it's teaching us about Messiah the Prince, how he would come to cut a new covenant in his blood by offering himself on the cross, that through his resurrection, that though his own people would reject him, that he would see his seed, that he would be resurrected and raised from the dead, and that he would come a second time after the first half of the week was fulfilled with his 3.5 year ministry. He went to the cross. So right there, now you're at the middle of the week. And now you have the Jewish Messiah being crucified in the middle of the week, not by the end of the 69th week. See, that's the difference right here. This makes it all a whole new ball game. Whether you put the pause and his crucifixion and his resurrection to have occurred by the end of the 69th week, or whether you put it properly where it should be in the middle of the 70th week, that makes the prophecy pause right then. It was put on hold because the prophecy had to do with Daniel's people and the city of Jerusalem. And so it could not go any further until they eradicated or appeased what caused the prophecy to stop in the first place. What caused this prophecy to be put on hold, what caused it to be paused and stop, was their rejection of the Messiah. He came to his own, but they received him not. But when he comes again to start up the prophecy up again at the end of this age, at the end of the sixth great day, then they will rectify the foul, because when they see him come for the church, as every eye will, that it is then that they will say, blessed is he who comes in his own name? No, in the name of the Lord. That's when they believe. Our third day resurrection, being caught up in the rapture, triggers their third day revival and reinstitution as the people of God, looking once again for the prophecy, the Messiah. But especially it starts the 70th week prophecy back up. So how much of the prophecy of this last 70th week is left to be fulfilled? It's very simple. He was cut off, crucified, and resurrected in the middle of the 70th week. So the first 3.5 years were already fulfilled back then when Jesus came the first time. And the pause is there in the middle. The week when it starts up, there's only a half a week left, prophetically speaking, to be fulfilled. That will be fulfilled, that 3.5 years, when he comes in the rapture at the end of this age, and that will restart this prophecy in Daniel's, the 70th week, but more specifically, the last half of the week. That's why, if you examine the prophecies carefully in the book of Revelation that has to do with the future Antichrist, you'll find that this 3.5 year period is mentioned specifically no less than 8 times. Between that and the book of Daniel, where it also appears. And why? Why not? Of course it does, because there's not a 7-year period left to be fulfilled, as we've been improperly taught. There is instead only 3.5 years left to be fulfilled. They start ticking off when Jesus comes for us in the rapture and takes us to the Father's house. And that happens at the end of this age, at the end of the 6th day. And you might say, well, wait a minute, doesn't that put the Antichrist into the millennium, into this last 1,000-year day? Oh, absolutely it does. Of course it does. He is still on the earth as the age to come begins. That's why it says that Jesus was given a name above every name, not only in this age, but also in the age to come. It would be important for his name to be above every name in the age to come. Because in this 7th day, while we're reigning up in heaven, and I want you to understand the definition of reigning is treading, putting every enemy underfoot. For he must reign. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 15. For he, Jesus, must reign until every enemy, all power and all authority that is against him is put underfoot. The last enemy to be put underfoot is death itself. That happens at the end of the 1,000 years. Well, back up. Who's the first enemy or enemies to be put underfoot during this 1,000-year day? Well, we know from Scripture, it's very easy. It's the Antichrist. It's the beast and the false prophet and their coalition of 10 kings. It's the Gentile kingdoms forming that stature that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream that went through the various kingdoms that oppressed Israel. Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans, and that empire split also with the Turkish Empire. And so then you come down to the end where the statue can't go any further other than its feet. You've been through all of the statue, all of the kingdoms, all of the Gentile kingdoms. Now, the statue has got only the feet left, prophetically speaking, to be fulfilled. And they have 10 toes, made of both iron and clay, but they don't really mix, do they? And so that's when the stone cut out of the mountain without human hands, that's Christ and his church, strike the image. On the head? No. In the belly? No. In the legs? No. On the feet. And that's the end time kingdom formed with the Antichrist, the false prophet. That's the one that's flourishing as this 7th day begins. Yeah. And because the 7th day is all about treading, it's all about putting enemies underfoot. That's what really rocked the boat. That's why we couldn't understand how the Antichrist could be on the earth still when the 7th day, the day of the Lord, begins. But you see, he has to. The day of the Lord is the wrath of God against and upon the nations. And the first order of business is to pull down the Gentile kingdoms. It's to bring an absolute consummate end to the times of the Gentiles and obliterate them, cause that statue to crumble and be smashed, and then, as chaff in the wind, to blow away and be no more. Not a trace. And that's the restoration. When that happens, you have the restoration of the kingdom of God to Israel. See, that's what the disciples asked at the beginning at his ascension. Will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Well, it wasn't time yet. But when he comes again, it will be time. It will be time to fulfill that last 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week and cause the covenant that he cut in his blood to prevail, not only for us spiritually, but also for the nation of Israel and for the world in a political, a world power sense, in every sense, so that Jerusalem is the capital of the whole earth. It becomes a praise in all of the earth.